The gallows in Redemption's Bluff was new. So new you could smell the fresh-cut pines sweating in the Arizona heat, a sticky, sweet scent of death. Below it, a 19-year-old girl named Rosalind Hayes stood waiting for a burlap sack to steal the sky. She was an orphan, a laundress, a nobody. Her only real crime was being born poor. But today, she was a convicted murderer. The crowd gathered in the sun-baked square didn't have doubts. They had certainty, a grim, church-going certainty that justice was about to be done. A rope was going to pull the truth right out of her. But the truth in the West is a slippery thing. It changes hands faster than a poker cheats ace, and sometimes the most unexpected man is holding the winning card. The cell was a kiln. The air was thick, tasting of old sweat and new fear. Rosalind sat on a cot, her dress a damp rag clinging to her skin. The tears had stopped hours ago. They'd left dry, salty rivers on her cheeks. Through the one-barred window, she could see a sliver of blue sky, the last blue she'd ever see. Her mind had been a trapped bird for a week, beating itself bloody against the bars of what happened. Now it was just tired. It played the memory on a loop, not with panic, but with a dull, hollow throb. Bartholomew Kane. The name was like a brand on the town, a name of fear and respect. He owned the silver mine. He owned the general store. He owned the men who were about to watch her die. To Rosalind, he was just the man whose expensive shirts always had sweat stains around the collar. The man whose eyes crawled over her skin when she brought his clean laundry to the back door of his sprawling ranch. That night, the moon was a splinter of bone in a black sky. She was walking home to her tiny room over the smithy, the few coins she'd earned tied in a scrap of cloth. Kane found her in the alley, the space between the saloon and the assayer's office. He smelled of whiskey, a thick, suffocating cloud. His words were promises of money and an easy life, but his eyes promised something else entirely, something brutal. "A pretty thing like you," he'd grunted, his big hand clamping on her arm like a blacksmith's vise, "shouldn't be walking alone." She tried to pull away. "Please, Mr. Kane, I have to get home." His laugh was a predator's growl. He slammed her back against the rough adobe wall. Grit and grime dug into her back. Cold, sharp panic shot through her. When his other hand went for the collar of her dress, something inside her just snapped. Her free hand, small and chapped from lye soap, found a loose brick on the ground. She didn't think. She just swung. She put all her terror, all her desperation into that one single motion. There was a sound, a wet, sickening thud as the brick hit his temple. Bartholomew Kane, the king of Redemption's Bluff, just folded. He went down like a sack of grain and didn't make a sound. She didn't stay to look. She just ran. The brick fell from her numb fingers, her heart trying to hammer its way out of her chest. They found her an hour later, huddled in her room, shaking. The sheriff, a man named Collier with tired eyes, looked at her with something like pity. But it didn't last long. The most powerful man in town was dead. Somebody had to hang for it. A poor, nobody laundress was the perfect somebody. The trial wasn't a trial. It was a play. Judge Horatio Blackwood sat on his high bench, his face carved from stone. But his eyes were alive, cold, flinty, and satisfied. Everyone knew he and Kane were partners. They owned this town, the law included. Rosalind had no lawyer, just her own terrified words. She told them what happened. She told them about the assault, the fear. She told them she was just trying to save herself. Judge Blackwood listened without moving a muscle. Then he took her story and tore it to shreds. He painted a new picture for the jury, a picture of a conniving little harlot who lured the respectable Mr. Kane into that alley to rob him. And when the robbery went wrong, she turned to murder. The town doctor had examined her, a deep, lasting humiliation, and found her to be a virgin. Blackwood twisted even that. He said it wasn't proof of innocence. It was proof of her cunning. "A wolf in sheep's clothing," the judge had boomed, his voice filling the courtroom. "She uses a mask of purity to hide a heart filled with greed and violence." The jury was 12 men. 12 men who worked in Kane's mine or owed money at Kane's store. They were back in less than 10 minutes. Guilty. Now she could hear the hammers outside, finishing her gallows. Each hammer strike was another nail in her coffin. Sheriff Collier stood at her cell door. The jangle of his keys was the sound of the world ending. "It's time, Rosalind," he said, his voice softer than she deserved. She stood up. Her legs were shaking, but a strange calm washed over her. She was innocent. In these last moments, that was the only truth that mattered. She walked out of the dark jail into the blinding, hateful light of the town square. The crowd was a wall of faces, some hungry, some satisfied, some ashamed. They parted for her. At the bottom of the gallows steps, Judge Blackwood stood in his black Sunday suit, holding a Bible. He looked at her, and in his eyes she saw it. Not anger, just cold, clean satisfaction. He was balancing the books. Her life was just an entry in the ledger. "May God have mercy on your corrupted soul, child," he said, his voice ringing out for everyone to hear. The hangman pulled the rough burlap hood over her head. The world went dark and small and suffocating. Rosalind said one last, silent prayer. Not for mercy, not for heaven. She just prayed that somewhere, truth was worth more than silver. The noose was stiff. It settled around her neck like a cold snake. She felt the hangman's hands on her shoulders, moving her into place over the trap door. This was it. The world went silent, holding its breath, waiting for the crack of the lever, waiting for the snap of her neck. On the edge of town, where the respectable streets dissolved into dust and sagebrush, sat a man the kids called Ghost. He wasn't a spirit, but he might as well have been. He lived in the burned-out shell of an old way station. His face was a map of hard miles, his skin the color of old leather. His eyes, once dark and sharp, were bleached out by sun in a sadness so deep it had burned away all the joy. The townspeople saw a drunk, an Apache who had wandered out of the desert years ago and stayed, a man who'd trade a perfectly trapped fox pelt for a bottle of the cheapest whiskey in the saloon. They called him Ghost because he moved through their world, but was never a part of it. A silent reminder of a people they had pushed aside, an accusation they could ignore by calling him a worthless drunk. They didn't know his name was Listening Wind. They didn't know a white man's sickness had swept through his camp like a fire, taking his wife, Mourning Dove, and his son, Little Hawk. He was the only one left to walk with a grief so big it had swallowed the man he used to be. The whiskey didn't help him forget. It just turned down the volume on the ghosts that followed him. Today, Ghost was sober. The clarity was like a knife. The world was too sharp, too loud. He saw the crowd in the square, a dark knot of people hungry for a death. He'd seen it before. The white man's justice was a strange and ugly show. He had no stake in their world. Their laws, their sins, their gods. They were nothing to him. He was about to turn away, to find the bottle he had hidden, when he saw the girl. She was small, walking with her back ramrod straight, a tiny flicker of defiance in a hurricane of terror. He knew her, the laundress, the quiet girl who left water out for the stray dogs, the girl whose eyes were sad long before she was sentenced to die. He had seen her that night, the night Bartholomew Kane died. Ghost had been in the shadows near the livery, caught in that painful, jagged space between drunk and sober. He walked the town at night sometimes, a phantom moving through the moonlight, when the world was quiet enough for him to pretend he wasn't so alone. He saw Kane, reeking of booze and cheap perfume, drag the girl into the alley. He heard her pleas. He'd felt a spark, an old instinct to protect the weak. His hand had even gone to the knife at his belt, but he'd stopped. He was an Indian, an outcast. If he stepped in, they'd say he attacked the great Mr. Kane. They'd hang him from the nearest tree and not even bother with a trial. So he had stayed in the shadows, a stone in his chest. He watched her swing the brick. He heard the crack. He watched her run. He had slipped away before the sheriff came, melting back into the desert that had birthed him. He told himself it wasn't his fight. He told himself her world had its own rules. He spent the next week trying to drown the image of her terrified face in whiskey, but it wouldn't drown. Now, watching her climb those 13 steps, the apathy that had been his shield for years began to crack and fall away. In her straight-backed walk, he saw his wife, Mourning Dove. In her youth, he saw his son, Little Hawk. The white man's world had taken everything from him. Now it was about to commit one more casual cruelty and call it justice. They were going to kill a girl for refusing to be a victim. A fire he thought had long since turned to ash began to smolder in his gut. It was a foolish, reckless feeling. It was rage. He looked at Judge Blackwood, preening for the crowd like a buzzard. He looked at the hangman. He looked at the faces in the crowd, hungry and righteous. And he knew. He could not stay a ghost any longer. He stood up. His joints creaked in protest. His mind, clearer than it had been in years, started to race. He couldn't just accuse them. They'd call him a drunk. He couldn't beg for mercy. They'd laugh. He needed something they couldn't ignore, something from their own world. He remembered stories, whispers from old-timers about how this town was founded. Redemption's Bluff, a place started by outcasts who made their own laws before the territory government ever existed. A town charter, they called it. A dusty book nobody had seen in 50 years. He'd seen it once, helping the town clerk move old furniture. A leather-bound book with yellow pages. It was a crazy long shot. It would probably get him shot. But as he watched the hangman slip the noose over Rosalind Hayes's head, he knew that doing nothing was just another kind of death. It was the death of the man he used to be. He started walking toward the square. The bottle of whiskey lay forgotten in the dust. For the first time in a long, long time, listening wind wasn't trying to escape the world. He was about to try and change it. The silence in the town square was so thick you could feel it pressing on your skin. The only sound was the faint creak of the gallows as the hangman shifted his weight near the lever. Rosalind stood on the trap door, alone in the blackness of the hood. She focused on the air moving in and out of her lungs. Each breath was a tiny victory. Judge Horatio Blackwood raised his hand. It was time. His face was a perfect mask of solemn duty. In accordance with the laws of this territory, his voice boomed, and in the sight of God Almighty, we commit this sinner to her judgment. He was cut off. Stop! The word was rough, gravelly. It sliced through the judge's holy speech like a razor. Murmurs spread through the crowd as every head turned. There at the edge of the square stood Ghost. He was a jarring sight. Worn clothes, wild hair. He swayed just a little. The conclusion was instant and obvious on every face. The town drunk had picked a hell of a time to make a scene. Sheriff Collier took a step forward, his hand going to his gun. "This is not justice," Ghost called out, his voice stronger now. He walked into the open space in front of the gallows, ignoring the glares and the insults. His eyes were locked on Judge Blackwood. "Remove this drunken fool," Blackwood roared, his face turning a blotchy red. "Sheriff, do your duty." Collier moved, but Ghost held up a hand, stopping him in his tracks. "I am not here as a drunk," he said, his voice shockingly clear. "I am here as a citizen of this territory, and I challenge this proceeding." A few people laughed. "On what grounds, you savage?" someone shouted. Ghost didn't even flinch. His eyes never left the judge. "I invoke the Redemption Charter, the founding law of this town." The laughter died. A confused silence fell over the square. The charter was a myth, a bedtime story. No one had invoked it in living memory. Blackwood scoffed. "The charter is a relic. It has no bearing here. We are governed by territorial law, which you have just broken. Seize him." Two deputies moved forward, but Ghost's voice rang out again, sharp and full of an authority no one had ever heard from him. "Article 7, he declared, the right of witness intercession. It states that if a new witness comes forward at the final moment with evidence pertinent to the condemned's innocence, the execution must be stayed for 24 hours to examine the claim." He let the words sink in. Then he looked straight at Blackwood. "It is the founding law of Redemption's Bluff, Judge. Are you saying this town no longer believes in redemption?" The challenge hung in the air, aimed not just at the judge, but at the very soul of the town. The crowd shifted, restless. They'd come for a hanging clean and simple. This was messy. Blackwood's face was a thundercloud. He knew the Apache was right. The charter had never been officially revoked. It was a legal ghost, but it was real. To ignore it now, so publicly, would make him look like a tyrant. "And what evidence could a degenerate like you possibly possess?" Blackwood spat. "I was there," Ghost said simply. "I saw what happened in that alley, and I know she did not commit murder." A collective gasp went through the crowd. Under the hood, Rosalind felt her legs threaten to give out. A tiny, impossible sliver of hope cut through her despair. Sheriff Collier hesitated, his hand still on his gun. He was a man who followed orders, but the trial had felt wrong. Too fast. Too neat. "Judge," Collier said, his voice low, "he's invoked the charter. People are listening. To proceed now, it wouldn't look right." Blackwood was trapped by a drunken Indian and a 50-year-old piece of paper. His eyes darted around the square, seeing the doubt on the faces. He had lost control. He glared at Ghost, his eyes promising a world of pain. "Very well," he bit out, the words like poison. "The law in all its tedious forms will be observed. 24 hours. The execution is stayed." He pointed a trembling finger at Ghost. "But this man will be held in a cell. If his evidence proves to be a drunken fantasy, he will be charged with obstructing justice. And I will see to it personally that he is bullwhipped in this very square. Take him away." The deputies grabbed Ghost's arms. He didn't resist. As they led him to the jail, the hangman, looking completely lost, pulled the noose and hood from Rosalind's head. For a second, her eyes met Ghost's. She saw no pity. She saw an ancient, fierce promise, an ember glowing in the heart of a ghost. She was led back to her cell, her legs barely working. She wasn't saved. She just had a day. One day, bought for her by the town drunk. The jail now had 2 prisoners. Rosalind was back in her cell, the air just as hot, just as final. Ghost was in the one across the narrow corridor. Through the shut door to the sheriff's office, she could hear Judge Blackwood's voice, a muffled, furious storm breaking over Sheriff Collier. She sat on her cot, her whole body shaking with the aftershocks of standing on that trap door. She looked at the man who had bought her this single terrifying day. He sat on the floor, his back against the bars, his eyes closed. The fire she'd seen in the square was gone, banked down to a faint glow. He didn't look like a savior. He looked broken. "Why?" she whispered, her voice cracking. "Why did you do that? They'll hurt you." Ghost opened his eyes. They held an ocean of weariness. "They were already hurting me," he said, his voice a low rumble, "just in a different way." He studied her face. "You have the eyes of a hunted thing, but you are not a killer." "No one will believe you," she said, the despair creeping back. "They all believe the judge." "The judge tells a story," Ghost replied. "He is good at it, but a story is just words. The truth leaves tracks." The judge's tirade finally ended with the slam of a door. A few minutes later, Sheriff Collier came into the cell block. His face was gray with exhaustion. He stopped at Ghost's cell. "You'd better have something, son," he said. "You've kicked a hornet's nest, and Blackwood is the king hornet." "I have the truth," Ghost said. "Truth ain't worth a damn in this town without proof," Collier grumbled, unlocking the cell door. "Come on, the judge wants to see you. Alone." A cold fear gripped Rosalind as they led Ghost away. This was it. Blackwood would threaten him, beat him, make him take it all back. Inside the office, Judge Blackwood sat behind a desk as big as a boat. The room smelled of leather and power. He waited until Collier left, closing the door softly behind him. "I am a man who appreciates order," Blackwood began, his voice dangerously quiet. "You are an agent of chaos. I am giving you one chance to avoid a great deal of pain. You will go back out there. Tell everyone you were drunk and mistaken, and you will leave this town. Forever. Do that, and I will forget this happened." Ghost stood before the desk, his face unreadable. He had faced starvation. He had faced a grief that could swallow a man whole. A man in a suit was nothing. "The girl is innocent," he said, his voice flat. Blackwood's calm shattered. He slammed his hand on the desk. "The girl is a murderer, and you are a drunken liar. What proof could you possibly have?" "I don't need to conjure it," Ghost said. "I saw it. I saw Bartholomew Kane assault her. I saw her defend herself. It was not murder. It was survival." "Your word against mine," Blackwood sneered. "The word of a drunken Indian against the most respected judge in this territory. That is a battle you will not win." Ghost took a small step closer. "It will not be just my word. When a man is surprised, he leaves a trail. When a man plans a lie, he makes mistakes. He leaned forward. Tell me, Judge, why was there a woman's riding glove, a fancy one made of soft doe skin, found in the mud 50 yards from the alley? Blackwood's eyes widened, just for a fraction of a second, but it was enough. It was a bluff. Ghost had seen no glove, but he had seen something else that night. After Rosalind ran, and before the town arrived, a second figure had slipped into the alley, a rider. They dismounted, spent a moment near Kane's body, and then ridden off on a fine, dark mare with a very distinctive gait. The judge's flicker of shock was all the proof Ghost needed. He had hit a nerve. Someone else was there. I know nothing of any glove, Blackwood said, his voice turning to ice. Your time is running out. This bluff of yours will fail. We will see, Ghost said, turning his back on the judge. 23 hours, Judge. The clock is ticking. He was led back to his cell. Rosalind's eyes were wide with questions. What did he say? She asked. He is afraid, Ghost said, a grim satisfaction in his voice. He looked at her, his gaze sharp. The truth is a stone at the bottom of a muddy river. We just have to stir the water. Then he asked a question that seemed to come from nowhere. The night Kane attacked you, did you smell anything other than whiskey? Rosalind frowned, forcing her mind back into the alley. Kane smelled of sweat and liquor, yes. But there was something else. A faint scent clinging to his coat, something she'd noticed just before he grabbed her. Lavender, she said, her own eyes widening. It was faint. I thought it was strange. A slow, hard smile touched Ghost's lips for the first time. Lavender, he repeated softly. The water is getting cloudy, little bird. The stone is starting to move. He knew exactly who in town wore expensive lavender perfume from Paris. There was only one person, the grieving widow, Matilda Kane. News of the state execution spread through town like a fever. Redemption's bluff, once so certain, was now split down the middle. In the saloon, men loyal to Judge Blackwood loudly called the Apache a liar. But elsewhere, whispers started. The blacksmith, the women at the general store. They knew Rosalind. They knew her quiet, hard-working nature. It was always hard to picture her as a killer. Sheriff Collier was trapped right in the middle of it. His job depended on the judge, but Ghost's words and Blackwood's explosive reaction had planted a seed of doubt that was growing fast. Back in his office, Collier slumped in his chair. He was a lawman. The law was supposed to be about truth, not what was convenient. He thought about Ghost's strange bluff, a doeskin glove. On a hunch, he pulled out the thin file on Kane's murder. The list of evidence was short. Kane's body, his wallet full of money, which made robbery unlikely, and a single pearl button found near the alley. It didn't match Kane's clothes or Rosalind's dress. He dismissed it at the time. Now he rolled the small iridescent button in his palm. It was from an expensive garment. His conscience gnawing at him, Collier made a decision. He went back to the cells. Lavender, he said quietly to Ghost. The girl mentioned lavender. Ghost nodded. Matilda Kane's perfume, imported from Paris. The whole town knows it. That's not proof, Collier said, but his voice lacked conviction. She could have been with him earlier that day. Ask yourself this, Sheriff, Ghost countered, his voice calm, persuasive. Kane was a pig. Everyone knew he saw the saloon girls. He smelled of cheap whiskey and cheaper women when he cornered that girl in the alley. Why would a man on his way to a harlot wear the scent of his own wife? The question was simple and devastatingly logical. And the horse, Ghost continued, a dark bay mare, a Tennessee walker, rides smooth as silk. Who in town owns a horse like that? Collier's face went pale. Matilda Kane, he whispered. It was a gift from her husband. The truth leaves tracks, Sheriff, Ghost repeated. You just have to be willing to follow them. Collier left the jailhouse feeling the judge's eyes on him from the courthouse window. His first stop was the Kane Ranch. Matilda Kane, dressed in widow's black, met him in a parlor that smelled faintly of lavender. Her face was a perfect mask of grief. Sheriff, she said, dabbing at her dry eyes, to what do I owe this intrusion? Just a follow-up, ma'am, Collier said, holding out the pearl button. "We found this at the scene. Do you recognize it?" He saw it, a flicker of pure panic in her eyes before the mask was back in place. "Goodness, no," she said, barely glancing at it. "It could belong to anyone." "It's from a woman's riding coat," Collier pressed. "A very fine one." "I have been in mourning, Sheriff," she said coolly. "I have not been riding." It was a dead end, her word against a button. Frustrated, Collier went to the livery stable. He found the stable hand, a boy named Timothy. He made small talk about the horses before getting to the point. "That's a fine mare Mrs. Kane has," Collier said casually. "The Tennessee Walker." "Yes, sir," Timothy said. "Midnight. Fastest horse in the county." "Does she ride her much?" "Almost every evening," the boy said. "Likes to ride out at sunset. Did so the night Mr. Kane passed. Came back in a real lather, both of them, the horse and her." Collier's heart started to pound. "You're sure it was that night?" "Yes, sir," Timothy said, his brow furrowed. "I remember, 'cause she gave me an extra dollar to rub Midnight down proper and to keep quiet about her ride. Said the judge told her it wouldn't look right, a grieving woman being out for a pleasure ride." The pieces were slamming into place. Matilda Kane hadn't been on a pleasure ride. She'd followed her husband. Collier's last stop was Dr. Finch. The old doctor was cleaning his glasses. "I need to ask about the wound that killed Kane," Collier said. "Rosalind is a small girl. Kane was a big man." "It's plausible," the doctor said. "A lucky strike to the temple with a hard object." "But is it probable," Collier pressed, "that a girl that size in a panic could kill him with one blow?" Dr. Finch put on his spectacles. He looked at Collier over the rims. "Probable? No. Possible? Yes, that was my testimony." He leaned closer. "But since you're asking me, Sheriff, there was something odd. The contusion was clean. The force was directed at a single point. It felt less like a wild, panicked swing and more like a deliberate, focused strike." He paused. "Almost as if it were delivered by something heavier and smaller than a brick. Say, the butt of a riding crop." The water wasn't just muddy anymore. It was a raging river, and it was sweeping Sheriff Collier toward a truth far more dangerous than the judge's neat little story. He had a motive, Kane's cheating. He had a means, a riding crop. He had an opportunity, the stable boy's testimony. And he had a cover-up, orchestrated by the judge himself. Walking back to the jail as the sun began to set, Collier knew he had to make a choice between the man who signed his paychecks and the man sitting in his jail cell. Judge Blackwood watched from his courthouse window as Sheriff Collier made his rounds. He saw him at the Kane Ranch. He saw him at the livery. He saw him go into the doctor's office. Each stop was another nail being hammered into the coffin of his perfect lie. He had underestimated the Apache. He'd seen a drunk, not a razor-sharp mind. And he had definitely underestimated Collier's inconvenient conscience. Blackwood and Kane weren't just partners. They were criminals. They skimmed silver from the mine. They strong-armed ranchers off their land. Kane was the muscle. Blackwood was the law, twisted into a weapon. Kane's death wasn't just the loss of a partner. It was a loose thread that could unravel everything. Matilda had come to him that night, hysterical. She'd followed her husband to the alley. She arrived right after Rosalind ran, finding Kane stunned but alive. In a white-hot flash of rage born from years of humiliation, she had struck him with the weighted handle of her riding crop. One clean, precise blow. Blackwood had seen the opportunity. He calmed Matilda, sent her home, and coached the stable boy. The terrified laundry rest was the perfect scapegoat. It had been flawless, until the ghost decided to speak. Desperation was a physical thing, clawing at his throat. He couldn't let a drunk and a half-wit sheriff destroy him. He needed to take back control. He sent for his two most reliable men, a pair of hard-faced miners named Roth and Finley. Men on his payroll for jobs the law couldn't touch. He met them in a back room. "The Indian is in the town jail," Blackwood said, his voice low and urgent. "He cannot be allowed to speak tomorrow. I want him silenced. A fire, a fight, an accident. I don't care how you do it. Just make sure he doesn't see the sunrise." Roth, a giant of a man with a broken nose, grinned. "A pleasure, Judge." As night fell, Sheriff Collier sat in his office, the doctor's words echoing in his head. Confronting the judge was career suicide. In this town, it could be a death sentence. But letting an innocent girl hang was a betrayal of everything his badge was supposed to stand for. He heard a noise from the cells. It was Ghost, humming a low, tuneless song. It wasn't a sound of fear. It was the sound of a hunter waiting. "You expecting trouble?" Collier asked, walking to the cell block. Ghost stopped humming. "The judge is a rattlesnake. You have cornered him. He will strike." The words sent a chill down Collier's spine. He checked his revolver. He lit another lamp, chasing the shadows from the small building. Around midnight it came, a flicker of orange light at the back of the jail, then the sharp smell of smoke. Collier burst out the back door. A pile of oil-soaked rags was burning against the rear wall. It was a clumsy fire, meant as a distraction. As Collier ran to stomp out the flames, Roth and Finley came out of the alley shadows, clubs in their hands, and charged the front door of the jail. But Ghost was ready. The second he smelled smoke, he was on his feet. He ripped the thin mattress from his cot, tore it open, and dumped the straw filling onto the floor. When Roth kicked the front door in, Ghost kicked the pile of straw into the air, creating a blinding cloud of dust. In that split second, Ghost slammed his own cell door outward, catching Roth square in the face. The big man staggered back, roaring in pain. Finley rushed past him, swinging his club wildly. Ghost dodged, using the bars of his cell for leverage, and launched a powerful kick into Finley's ribs. The man collapsed, the air driven from his lungs. By the time Collier got back inside, gun drawn, the fight was over. Roth was holding a bloody nose. Finley was groaning on the floor. Ghost stood calmly in his open cell, not even breathing hard. "The rattlesnake strikes," he said quietly. Collier stared at the scene. The smoke, the groaning thugs, the silent Apache. All his doubt hardened into a single point of certainty. He pointed his Colt at the two men. "On your feet," he ordered, his voice ringing with a new authority. "You're both under arrest, and you're going to tell me exactly who sent you." He looked at Ghost, not as a prisoner, but as an ally. "Sun's up in a few hours. The judge's deadline is over. What's our next move?" Ghost's eyes glinted in the lamplight. "The judge wants a show," he said. "We will give him one. But this time, the story will be ours." The sun rose on a town electric with tension. The square filled up again, but the mood was different. The grim certainty was gone, replaced by a restless, anxious curiosity. News about the fire at the jail had spread like a virus. At 8 o'clock, Judge Blackwood emerged from the courthouse. His face was a mask of cold fury. He knew his thugs had failed. This was his last chance to crush the story before it crushed him. He stood on the courthouse steps. "The 24 hours have expired," he boomed. "The drunken ramblings of a savage have produced nothing of substance. The verdict stands. Sheriff, bring out the prisoner Rosalind Hayes, and let us proceed with this long-delayed justice." But Sheriff Collier didn't move. Instead, the jailhouse door opened, and Ghost stepped out. Not in chains, walking free. He was followed by Collier, who was escorting Roth and Finley, their hands bound. A gasp went through the crowd. "There will be no hanging today, Judge," Collier announced, his voice clear as a bell. "But there will be justice. These men have confessed to attempting to silence a witness last night. On your orders." Blackwood's face went white. "Lies! Coerced by a rogue sheriff." "Is it a lie, Judge?" Ghost's voice cut through the air. He walked to the center of the square. He held something in his hand. He was no longer the town drunk. He was a warrior. "A story was told in your courthouse," he said, his voice carrying to every corner of the square. "A story of a greedy girl and an innocent man. But the truth leaves tracks. Let me tell you another story." He told them what he saw in the alley. Kane's assault, Rosalind's self-defense. "But that is not where the story ends," he said, his eyes finding Matilda Kane in the crowd. "Because Bartholomew Kane was not dead when the girl fled." He laid out the evidence piece by piece. The lavender perfume, the pearl button from a riding coat, the stable boy's story of a frantic late-night ride. Then he held up the object in his hand. a handsome riding crop with a silver-weighted handle. "Dr. Finch!" Ghost called out. "Would a blow from this be consistent with the fatal wound on Mr. Kane?" The old doctor, near the front, nodded grimly. "More consistent than a brick, I'd wager." Every eye in the square turned to Matilda Kane. Her composure shattered. The mask of grief twisted into a snarl of pure hate. "He deserved it!" she shrieked, her voice cracking with years of fury. "The pig! He humiliated me for years. He flaunted his women. He beat me. I found him in that alley, still alive, and I finished it. I'm glad I did." Her confession ripped the air. Then she pointed a trembling finger at the judge. "And he told me to keep quiet. He helped me. He said he'd pin it on the laundry rest. He couldn't risk the secrets dying with Bartholomew, the land grabs, the stolen silver. He's as guilty as I am." The spell was broken. The town's order collapsed. Judge Horatio Blackwood, exposed, made one last desperate move. He pulled a small derringer from his coat and aimed it at Sheriff Collier. But he was too slow. Ghost moved with impossible speed, tackling the judge, sending him sprawling in the dust as the little gun fired harmlessly into the sky. In an instant, the town turned on him. The men he'd cheated, the men he'd threatened, surged forward, their faces masks of rage. Collier, with the help of the blacksmith, managed to slap iron cuffs on the wrists that had, just hours ago, held the power of life and death over them all. Rosalind was brought out of her cell. She blinked in the bright sun, her eyes finding Ghost. Their gazes met. He gave her a single, almost invisible nod. He hadn't really done it for her. He'd done it for the memory of a wife and a son. He had done it for the last ember of the man he used to be. As the town began the messy work of tearing down its fallen kings, Ghost slipped away. He walked back to the burned-out way station. He picked up the unopened bottle of whiskey he'd left behind. He held it for a long moment. Then he poured it all out onto the thirsty ground. He was still a ghost, a man between worlds. But as he turned his back on Redemption's bluff and started walking toward the distant mountains, he walked with a straighter back. His own redemption wasn't in some forgotten town charter. It was in the simple, terrifying act of speaking the truth. And for the first time in a very long time, the ghosts of his past walked with him not as accusers, but as companions. And so the tale of Redemption's bluff comes to a close. It's a story that reminds us that heroes are rarely the ones in shining armor. Sometimes they are the outcasts, the forgotten ones, the people society has written off. It shows us that courage isn't the absence of fear, but the act of speaking truth in the face of it, even when your voice shakes. The West was filled with countless stories like this, tales of quiet desperation, shocking injustice, and unexpected salvation that are buried under the dust of history. These are the stories we aim to uncover, to bring back into the light. If this journey into the raw heart of the Old West moved you, please consider helping our community grow. Hit that like button to let us know you were here. Share this story with someone who appreciates a tale of true grit. And most importantly, subscribe to the channel. Every subscription ensures that more of these forgotten legends get a voice. Thank you for listening, and until our next tale, may your trails be true.